one of the big questions that I always get at this point is, well, how do you implement different learning styles in the classroom? You know, how do you do it? I mean, it's great in theoretically. Theoretically, great. Students learn different ways. I understand it. I learn different ways. That's fine. How do we practically implement that in the classroom? So here's a part of Sense Level 1, okay, the EG 2.0. These are the guidelines. Those of you that don't know what Sense is should definitely come to the Sense presentation tomorrow, but basically they're guidelines for national welding education that AWS puts out. By becoming a Sense school and by following these guidelines, your students can actually graduate with a entry-level welding certificate from AWS. All right, which can be very beneficial to them in the workforce. So this is part of Module 4. It's one of the key indicators, and basically what the key indicator says, what the goal of this particular lesson or set of lessons should be, is to operate shielded metal arc welding equipment on carbon steel. And so when you look at what the objective is here, okay, you need to be able to demonstrate what they're doing. They need to be able to weld on carbon steel with EG 6010 and 6011 and E7018 electrodes, and be able to perform those operations of those electrodes on carbon steel. And actually, if you start reading through the recommended instructor activities, it even goes so far as telling you, hey, you know, they need to start making 1G single layer multi-pass stringer bead welds. Okay, so this is fundamental. This is the first time they pick up a stick. You know, you've already gone through the safety. You know, you've already gone through all the fundamentals. They know how to fit up all the equipment. They know how to set everything up. Okay, now they're actually going to do their first welds. They're going to learn how to do stringer beads in the 1G position. They're going to do it on carbon steel. They're set up. They're ready to go. How do we set up this lesson to multiple learning styles? Okay, so how do we hit the different learning styles in doing this, in getting them to actually do it? All right, so someone, recommendation. You're all teachers in here. It can't be that difficult. Yes, sir.
I'll typically take slides or an actual coupon that's already been done and walk through with them and explain to them how to do it, making notes while I'm doing, you know. So
okay, so let's stop. We're going to first demonstrate what the outcome is, what the end goal is here, correct? So we're showing them, this is a coupon, this is a completed coupon, this is what a stringer bead is going to look like, okay? We're going to show it to each of them, they're going to be able to hold it. Now all those kids that are holding it, you know, that are looking at it, that are playing with it, that are feeling it, we're doing what? We're hitting the kinesthetics learners. We're hitting those guys that need to touch something, to feel it, to make a physical connection with it, right? Then what's the next thing that you were talking about? Showing them on the board or showing them a PowerPoint.
Yeah, you show them on the board or PowerPoint, or you'll sketch it out on the board, making notes, explaining the different steps, and then you explain it to them also while you're doing it, because then you're hitting the auditory learners.
Absolutely.
And then what I'll do is I'll take them out to the shop, demonstrate the correct way, and then I'll purposely screw up on it and show them what to look for when they're doing it wrong.
Okay, so hold on there a second. So now we've hit the kinesthetic learners because we let them hold the coupon, let them feel the weld, let them see it with their hands, let them touch it. The auditory learners, we've explained step by step the process. We've explained to them, you have to do this, you have to do that. We've hit the visual learners, because now we're going to do a demonstration. We're going to demonstrate the process step by step. You know, we're going to show them before I actually weld, I'm going to show them with the electrode, how I have to, you know, hit the arc, how I have to initiate the arc, how I form the weld, pull, and go. Before I even do anything, then we all put our hoods on, and I show them with a live arc, okay, this is how I do it. Then what do you do?
Then we use the little Hobart process books, and I will have them typically read.
So then they read. So now you've hit the read-write learners. Okay, so now they're reading also the step-by-step process. They have a checklist in front of them. These are the things you have to do as part of this lab assignment. Okay? Then you go out and actually do it. Professor Hutchinson yesterday said something very interesting in his speech. He said that as he got older, anyone that saw his speech said as he got older, he realized that he needed to spend less time showing or having the kids watch him weld and spending more time watching the kids weld. You know? And I thought that was very interesting because in the end, it is something that is a kinesthetic activity that they need to do. So that's the end of the lesson. So now we've hit all the major points, all right? So my question is this: how do we do that better? How do we do it better? I mean, we've hit all the major points, right? We've hit everything, right? But here's a rule I have. I have one rule about lesson plans. If you're bored reading your lesson plan, your students are going to be bored while you're implementing the lesson plan. It's that simple. There's a great presentation I saw on the internet the other day. His name is Dr. Tao. I don't remember. I think he was from Columbia in the engineering department. He gave a presentation about, I watched this a while ago, about education and what's wrong with education at the university level. And this was the last lecture he gave to his engineering students before they left his class. And they liked it so much that they wanted him to record it and put it on the internet. So he did that. And I was watching it, and it's very interesting because he said, I can sum up what's wrong with education in 2 words. School sucks. It's that simple. School sucks. To kids, to young adults, to adults, school sucks. If I told you right now you had to spend 8 hours of your day in a classroom looking at a board to get paid, you would much rather be doing any other job on the planet. No one wants to go to school. So how do we make school more interesting? How do we make it less boring? Right? How do we get interest built into the students? Well, this brings me to the topic of volcanoes. Okay? Again, giant leap for me, but it makes a lot of sense when you hear this story. I have a daughter who's 7 years old. Okay? And my daughter's very much into science. So much so that she said that for her 7th birthday, she wanted a microscope. Okay? I felt bad for her and I bought her some video games, but she wanted a microscope, so I bought her a microscope. And she always wants to do science experiments at home. And so one day she was very excited and she came home and she said, hey, I learned about volcanoes today. And I said, that's awesome. Volcanoes are cool. Tell me about volcanoes. They're mountains that explode. And I was like, that is awesome. Why do they explode? I don't know. Okay, well, all right, what did they explode with? Oh, I don't know. Okay, well, I mean, what's the red stuff that's coming out of it? What red stuff? Well, I mean, when you look at the volcano, the red stuff that's coming out of it, what is it? Oh, I didn't see a volcano. The teacher told us what a volcano was and told us we had to learn it for science. And that we learned that the volcano is a mountain that explodes. She's in 2nd grade and she's in the advanced class. And I said to myself, well, don't you want to know what a volcano is and what it looks like? Yeah, can we look at a volcano? I said, let's go to YouTube. So we went to YouTube, we popped in volcano exploding. We watched a few videos of volcanoes exploding. Her face melted while she was looking at this, in awe of this volcano exploding. And then there were a million questions. Why does it explode? What is that red stuff? What's going on? How can a mountain just explode? Can a volcano form under the house? You know? So all of a sudden, she's become a participant in the learning, as opposed to just a person who's receiving the learning. I use this in the Institute. I always talk about pedagogy. The word pedagogy comes from a Greek word that I'm going to butcher, that is pedagogos. And pedagogos is actually 2 words made up that are brought together. Pod is child, and agogos is to lead. And so pedagogos was a slave who used to lead the master's child to his lessons. Okay, so it was the person who used to, rich people used to have this guy who would lead the child to all the different people who would teach the child about the different things, whether it's music or politics or whatever, and would be there and be the guide for the child. Okay, he would guide the child's learning. In the modern incarnation of the word pedagogy. We use it to describe the art and science of teaching a child, or in many ways, just the art and science of teaching, regardless of whether it's a child or a young adult or an adult. Yeah, they're started to use they've started to use that, you know, I don't know, 20 years ago. But the truth of the matter is, if you were to go right now to any book on teaching, they're still going to use pedagogy. You know, the correct term is that, just like the correct term is to say shielded metal instead of stick. But we still have adopted the word pedagogy to just mean teaching. You know, the art of teaching, the science of teaching. You know, and so the question is, how did this happen? How did we lose that aspect of teaching in which the teacher was really a guide for the student, as opposed to someone who was teaching the student or telling the student what that student needs to learn? And really it starts back with my friend here, B.F. Skinner, who performed a very important experiment that I really don't understand. But basically what we did was he stuck a rat in a cage with an electrified grate and a little lever and 2 lights and a speaker. And anytime the speaker made a sound, okay, and the light was green, if the rat pressed the lever, then a little pellet of food would come out. But if the light was red and he pressed the lever, he'd get electrified. He'd get a little mild electric shock. And from this, we've developed how we teach children. Because this is how behaviorism came about. This was one of the ways that behaviorism came about. These experiments were later expanded, or you know, they were kind of contemporaries at the time, by Pavlov and Pavlov's dogs. I'm sure you guys have heard of this. You know, in which Pavlov set up a dog in this weird contraption to measure the amount of saliva it generates. And so what it would do is it would ring a bell and then put out a bowl of food. And the next day he would ring a bell and put out a bowl of food, and then the next day he'd ring a bell and put out the bowl of food. Well, eventually, you know, and obviously the dogs salivate more when they see the food because they're preparing their mouths to eat. Well, eventually he was able to just ring the bell and not even show the dog the food, and the dog would start to salivate as though it's about to eat, as though it saw the food. You know, because it started to make a connection between those two things. You know, and this is called conditioning. You know, it started to say, hey, I see this, so I'm going to salivate. So after he's conditioning, in this case it's a whistle, just blowing the whistle is going to cause the dog to salivate just as though he was seeing the food. This became one of the predominant theories of learning in the late 20th century. You know, and basically what it says is this: learning involves a behavioral change. When someone is learning something, they're learning it by changing their behavior in some way. How does that work? Well, it's simple. By learning something, the first thing we're doing is we're altering their perception of it. After we alter their perception of whatever it is they're learning, we're altering the way that they interpret that thing. Okay? After they interpret it, we change the way they interact with it. And eventually, there's a permanent behavioral change. Okay? It's it's a very simple step-by-step guide if you think about it, okay? Instead of just showing you food, I am showing you food with a bell. I now start to interpret the fact that the bell and the food go together. So eventually, the way I interact with the bell and the food separately changes. And that causes a permanent behavioral change. And this is the theory of how we teach children today. Okay? This is, I'm not going to say completely, but it's one of the primary reasons why classrooms are even physically set up, schools are physically set up in the way they're set up. Furthermore, and to explain it a little bit even further, he says that learning is largely a result of environmental events. So learning doesn't occur just inside the individual. It's largely responsible because of what's going on in your environment. What do I mean? Everyone is hit by stimuli all around them all the time. Okay? So this stimuli is occurring, and every moment you're getting stimuli from the people around you, from me speaking, from these PowerPoints, from the air conditioning, from the heat, from your clothes, from the chair. So there's stimuli all around you. Okay? Anytime that there's two stimuli, they keep occurring together. So for example, you're teaching a young kid how to eat at a table. You're always putting the fork and the knife. Well, those are two separate items, right? But every day when he comes to dinner, they're together. So what starts to happen? he starts to make a connection between those two stimuli. Right? He starts to make a connection between the fork and the knife. And then all of a sudden, as that fork and the knife keep showing up, right, you start to make the connection that those things belong together. Right? And then once that connection is made, it's reinforced on a daily basis. And so one of the key components of behaviorist theory is this idea of reinforcement. Okay? It's a very simple concept. Why do we have grades? What is the purpose of grades? Why do we have a system of education that has grades? Think about that just for 1 second. Because there are many, many, many liberal arts programs, and actually not even liberal arts programs. You know, there's a lot of advanced science programs that don't have grades. A lot of my brother's engineering courses did not have grades. They were pass-fail. Why do we have grades? Because it's a form of reinforcement. We're reinforcing any learning. We're reinforcing that, yes, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing for learning. Or no, you're not doing what you're supposed to be learning. You're not learning what you're supposed to be learning. You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Bad you. That's why we have grades. It's very simple. Well, Dave, aren't grades used to get into college? Chicken or the egg? Think about that for a second. What did we have? Did we have huge college admittance problems where we had so many people applying to college we had to decide who was going to go to which college? Or did we have schools set up where we had grades and then colleges said, oh, it's simple, we can use grades to determine which are the best students? It's always been the task of formal education to set up behaviors which will prove useful and enjoyable later in a student's life. That's my friend B.F. Skinner. It's the job of education to set up behaviors in the student that are going to be useful later on in their life. Okay? Again, the reinforcement, the way we reinforce students. B.F. Skinner at one point even wanted to say that he did say, we can replace all teachers. Okay, he created this that was called the learning machine. And basically the learning machine would give you, it's a very early form of a computer, it would give you a question, and then you would answer it. Right? And if the question was right, it would give you positive reinforcement. If the question was wrong, it would kill you. No, it would give you negative reinforcement. Okay? And he thought that was enough for students to learn with. Okay? And in many ways, that's what's wrong with behaviorist theory. You know, because it's built on these three premises. It's built on the premise that there needs to be curriculum-based measurements. That we have to measure the way a student learns by measuring how much of the curriculum they remember, how much of the curriculum they retain. Okay? 2, it talks about the fact that students have to be measured through functional behavioral assessments. So we have to make sure that there's a functional behavioral change. A student can do the math problems correctly, that's a behavioral change. All right, they understand the math, that's a behavioral change. We need to be able to functionally see that in the classroom. All right, and when there's not that kind of behavioral change, we need to have the correct amount of reinforcement to make sure that we can have that type of behavioral change. And finally, in many ways, it's based on the idea of direct instruction. Right? It's based upon the idea that the instructor, okay, is the possessor of knowledge. That it has this assumption that the student is like an empty glass, and we need to fill, as instructors, that student with knowledge by filling it with water. That's how it works. It completely discounts any experience or knowledge that the student may bring into class. I'm going to tell you another real quick story. My daughter came back. I'm really annoying to my daughter's teacher. I'm sure she does not like me. My daughter came back and said, hey, today in science we learned that there are 3 states of matter. And I said, you mean 4? She goes, no, there's 3 states of matter. And I said, no, Mama, you mean 4. She goes, no, there's 3. You can have a solid, you can have a liquid, or you can have a gas. And I said, yeah, but there's a 4th state of matter. You can have plasma. Oh, what's plasma? There's no such thing as plasma. Okay, Ella, what's lightning? I don't know. Is it a gas? No. Is it a solid? No. Is it liquid? No. Then what is it? It has to be something. So she goes back to class and she tells her teacher, my dad says that there's a 4th state of matter that you're not teaching us. It's called plasma. You know? And I'm like, Ella, why did you do that? Now you're putting me on the spot. You know, and the teacher fought with her. Last year was that Pluto was a planet. You know, and so it's like every day this is based on the idea that students can't contribute to the education. You know, and what I find funny is that it has this very sage on stage attitude. This idea that somehow the teacher is the possessor of great wisdom. Right? He's the great teacher, the great wisdom, the great keeper of knowledge, and that sage has that knowledge, and he's going to transmit that knowledge to you, and that it's your job to learn that knowledge, to memorize that knowledge, and then to be able to reproduce that knowledge to me. And that's how I'm going to assess that you know it, by being able to tell me what I just told you. You know? And when you look at direct instruction, I always think of this. You know, the idea that the student is a passive learner. You know, that the instructor is the subject expert, that no one else has any experience in here but me, that I can verbalize my knowledge to you, that you need to take notes, that you need to record, that you need to absorb this, and then eventually that you need to be able to regurgitate the information to me. That is death by PowerPoint, gentlemen. This is what kills me, having to look at this all day at meetings, okay? Just because you have an advanced degree or you're an expert in welding does not mean that your students do not have anything that they can contribute to the class. Just because my daughter's 7 years old doesn't mean that she knows something that could be of value to the instructor, to her teacher. You know, everything in here is direct instruction. I mean, practically, other than a few things that we've been doing, everything that we've been doing in this class is direct instruction. And this is what is defined in many ways as traditional pedagogy. You know, that is the traditional model of teaching that is passed on, you know, from teacher to student, from teacher to student. I always loved Calvin and Hobbes, because I always identified with him. This is what school was like for me, you know? I'd look up and I'd be like, great. It's, you know, the time's really flown by. I hope the teacher didn't say anything important, you know, because I just spent my entire 8 hours daydreaming. And so I feel like, in many ways, that's what we do as teachers. You know, we give students this sensory input in one way. We ask them to memorize it and then eventually to repeat it. And the truth of the matter is that the instructor needs to change the way we give that information, because the student needs to construct meaning. All right, this goes now, changes from behaviorist theory to constructivist theory. The idea being that in many ways, the student is constructing the meaning of what he's learning as he's learning it based on his past experiences. So a student, let's say my daughter, for example, who lives in a house where it's very heavily science-based. We talk about science all the time. We're doing science experiments. We're always talking about these things. We're always doing things like that. My father was a scientist. You know, I'm very heavily into science. She's going to have different experiences. She's going to have a different context for which she builds her learning from than someone who maybe lives in a very artistic house, you know, where they spend a lot of time painting and playing instruments. You know, she's not going to learn the same information, even though the instructor is giving the same information. And so in many ways, the student, the learner, becomes the focus of that education and not the instructor. And that's in many ways what we have to do, is we need to put the focus back on the teacher. So here's my question. How much do you remember? Of everything I've said today, how much do you remember? Because studies have shown that students retain about 70% of the information from the first 10 minutes of a lecture and about 20% of the last 10 minutes. This is if you were talking for 50 minutes. Okay? So how much learning is really taught in a classroom? You know, one of the social experiments I always do at Instructors Institute is I always like to teach people how to play golf. My knees are all banged up. I try to play basketball and I'm still in a lot of pain, but my knees are banged up, so I had to learn how to play golf. All right, because I'm still competitive as hell and I still want to beat my friends at something. All right, so I learned how to play golf. I'm very bad at it. I have a terrible handicap. And I thought to myself, how am I going to learn how to play golf? So I'm going to teach you guys how to hold a golf club. It's very simple. You place your left hand flat and perpendicular to the body, facing up. The golf handle rests diagonally across the left hand. Then you use your left hand, and if you're left-handed, you flip the grip, and your left hand closes and extends the thumb across the handle. If you want a right-handed grip, you slightly overlap your left thumb and extend the thumb for support. Okay, so everyone here knows how now to hold a golf club, correct? You see it in a picture, though it changes kind of how you're learning a little bit. It kind of gives you a little bit more information. You know, you're starting to see it a little bit. Oh, I see the pinky has to overlap the other one. That's what he's saying. When he's talking about it going diagonally, I see it a little bit better on the picture now. So it's just more information. Those people that are more visual are getting additional information here. But what's even better is give them a golf club. That's what we do with welding, isn't it? We give them a stick. We give them a gun. We let them weld. That's the only way to learn welding, you know? So now in this day and age, though, in which we're spending more time, or we should be spending more time teaching the science and theory of welding, as opposed to just teaching the art of welding, how do we teach the art and science of welding in that way? How do we make students actively involved in it? The idea of active learning derives from two basic assumptions. One is that learning is an active endeavor. You actually have to be doing something to learn from it. Otherwise, you're just watching TV. Two, that different people learn different ways, which we just talked about a little bit earlier today. So these are the keys. This is what I want you to focus on. This is the second thing I want to focus on, is that I want you to start thinking about the lesson planning in a way in which instead of you just transmitting information to your students, okay, that you're more of a guide, more of that traditional role for the teacher, okay? I love this quote by Confucius. I use it all the time when I talk about education. He said, every truth has four corners. As a teacher, I give you one corner. It's up to you to find the other three. All right? And what it comes down to is that in many ways, and I go back to the example of my son and my daughter. My daughter does not like going to school anymore, which is a tragedy, because I knew it was going to happen. My son loves going to school. What's the difference? In my daughter, they're forcing her to learn. Because in Florida, you have to take a test in 3rd grade. And you have to show a certain level of skills in all these different subjects. And you have to know all these different things. And if you don't, you have to repeat the grade. And it's a standardized test across the state. And schools are judged by how well their students perform on that. And their funding is based on that. So all they teach, even from 1st grade, is what's going to be on that test. So they're focused on making her learn this material. When my son goes to school, it's not about learning. It's about discovery. It's about that thing that makes us fundamentally human. Okay? The desire to go out and discover something new. I always maintain, Jimmy asked me a question coming in, he said, are you going to talk about what we could do to generate interest in our welding program? I told him, yeah, there's going to be a presentation later on today. I have a great presentation that I do around in the sections that I'll send you that you could use in your classrooms. In AWO very soon, American Welding Online very soon, we're going to have a presentation that you can use in your schools for parents with all the information they can need about the welding. But you want to know the truth, Jimmy? I know I've said this to you before. Getting kids into a welding program is easy. Just tell them, hey, come over here. I'm going to teach you how to cut metal with fire. Okay? I'm going to teach you how to use fire that is as hot as the sun. We're going to do things here that are going to blow your mind. And you're going to get to do it all yourself. And let them play with it. Yes, there's safety that we have to account for. Yes, we have to teach them the correct way of doing things. But in the end, in many ways, it goes back to what you were saying, sir. You said that in your classes, you'll mess up on purpose. And then, after you mess up, you want your students to tell you why you messed up. That's about discovery. You're asking them to discover for themselves. And this goes back to something that I think is fundamentally wrong with the way we teach. And that is that we teach our students from a very early age that it is wrong to fail at something. Think about the last time you learned how to do something. Anything. All right? Think about that for a second. How many times did you fail before you got it right? The other day, I saw a YouTube video of some dude who had Christmas lights. They were all synced up to music. And I showed it to my wife. I'm like, and I was watching this, and she looks at me, and she goes, oh no, oh no, oh no, you're going to do that. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do that. You better totally believe I'm going to do that. And I started doing research. And I'm like, look, look, look. She's like, look, you can buy one of those boxes where you can program it all to do all the music lights for about $150. And I said, yeah, I can buy it or I can build it. And she goes, but you don't know anything about electrical engineering. I said, yeah, exactly. Think about all the cool stuff I'm going to get to learn how to do now, to learn how to do this thing. So what did I do? On the way over here on the plane, on my Kindle, I bought a book on getting these, they sell these pre-wired circuit boards and how to program them and build different things with it, like stupid little things like I'm going to build an LED light set, you know? And you program and you do all the things and you solder all together. And I'm super excited about doing this because it's about discovery. And because it doesn't matter if I fail. It doesn't matter if I bang my head against the floor for 8 hours because I can't figure out what I did wrong. Because the moment when I do figure out what I did wrong, all of a sudden, I will never forget it for the rest of my life. It's what's fundamentally wrong with our classrooms. We are afraid to let our students fail. All right? So how do we implement discovery back into the classroom? That's one of the easiest ways of doing it. Let them fail. One of the things that I always, one of the examples I use is safety. All right? In sense, you're required to have your students get a 100% on their safety test before they can advance to actually welding. Right? Most teachers just give them a test. I ask teachers, why don't you go into the lab and set a bunch of things up wrong? And let them go in there and figure out what's wrong and why. Now you're allowing them to discover that for themselves. You don't actually ever let them weld, but say, okay, this is your welding machine. Go, make sure everything's right, and set it up. It's a practical example. It's a real life example, but more importantly, you're allowing them to fail. You're allowing them to say, hey, I screwed this up. I should have done this. Why didn't you check this? You know, so there's a lot of different ways that we can introduce this idea of discovery, but fundamentally it comes down to that idea that it's okay to fail. How many times did the Wright brothers fail before they finally got it right? I know that that's a very, extreme example of this, but it can be applied to anything in your life, anything in your classroom. Kids. Anytime you have a little kid, it's interesting to watch them when they start to learn how to walk, because they keep falling and falling and falling and falling. And then eventually one day they get it right. And then they never stop walking. And you dread that day for the rest of your life. So we need to not be afraid to fail. All right, the last thing I want to talk about is gamification. Some of you guys, when I said this originally, kind of rolled your eyes because you're like, oh, this is one of those hippie things he's going to talk about. And yes, in many ways it is. But I promise you that in 5 minutes from now, you're going to have a completely different perspective on this. Because I've done this presentation many, many times, and many, many people have come to me and said, you know what, I've never thought of it that way. It's very simple. Games, over the last 10 years, have infiltrated every aspect of our lives. You may not know this, but your life in many ways is governed by games. Let's look at what the Office of Naval Research, they've completed a study last year. Okay, and this is what the study has shown. Their study showed that individuals who play video games perform 10 to 20% higher in terms of perceptual and cognitive abilities than normal non-video game playing people. This is a general population study. Okay? So these people perform 10 to 20% higher. Furthermore, it went on to say that I think we're at the beginning of a new science of learning. Okay, that we will be there will be an integration of neuroscience with developmental psychology, with cognitive science, with artificial intelligence. All right, this is what's called fluid intelligence. The ability to perceive relationships independent of previously specified practice or structural concepts and relationships. So it's being able to understand that two things are connected, even though they're not really connected. How does that even apply to welding? That sounds like a lot of hobo-jobo for nothing, right? Think about this. Why isn't everyone in this room out there working as an inspector making $300,000 a year? It takes a lot to understand how a discontinuity is related to what the welder does. That's a large leap. There's a lot of understanding and education that has to come from that. That's what's called fluid intelligence. The ability to make those connections, to say this is connected to this in this way. Okay? And what it comes down to is this idea, is the ability to problem solve. The ability to see a problem and to solve the problem. And that's what gamification is about. By the way, as though my credentials in and of themselves, because I'm so great and knowledgeable and all-knowing, obviously I'm joking, is not enough. The Navy has now started to implement video games in their training. Okay? The Army has been doing this for a while now. Okay? They want their soldiers playing video games. Why? Soldiers that play video games, play Army games, for example, make quicker decisions than soldiers that don't. Why? Because their brains are rewired to be able to see problems, to dissect information, to see what possible solutions, and make a decision at a much quicker rate than people that don't. Again, remember back at the beginning when I said that kids in this generation, their brains are completely wired in a different way? That's what I'm talking about. They absorb information at such a quick rate, they can make decisions at such quick rates that in many times the way that we do things is too slow for them. Okay? Gamification. Gamification is the idea of integrating game mechanics into non-gaming situations. And this has penetrated every aspect of your life, I promise you. How many people have a credit card that gives them points for doing something? I just got my American Airlines card because it gives me miles every time I use it. Right? It's great because I get miles and I get a prize at the end. Right? How many people have a reward card for a particular store where if you go to that sandwich shop 10 times, you get a free sandwich? Right? Anyone know what Foursquare is? I guarantee you all your students use it. Foursquare is a program where you use your smartphone, and when you get to a location, you check in to that location. And the person who has checked into that location the most becomes the mayor of that location. Oh, hell, for the love of God is a great response. For the love of God. For the love of God. What if I told you that more people use Foursquare than read textbooks? You know, the whole population of China would not be enough to cover the amount of people that use Foursquare on a daily basis. I'm sorry?
I think they were doing it here.
Oh, I guarantee you they're doing it here. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, because they want to become the mayor. And you laugh, but I have an old colleague of mine who's in his early 40s, who the other day sent out a Facebook post bragging about the fact that he had become the mayor of the local his coffee shop, where he stops to get the Dunkin' Donuts, where he stops to get his coffee in the morning. He is now the mayor of that Dunkin' Donuts. And everyone knows that he's the mayor of that Dunkin' Donuts. And he was so proud of it. Sales. Everyone's seen flyers like this. If you show up at a particular time and date, you get, yeah, I know, it's a good deal. Hey, Black Friday, coming up next week, right? Black Friday, everyone's gonna be out in the stores. Why? Because you get a special deal. This is what's called, in game dynamics, this is what's called an appointment dynamic. In game theory, this is called an appointment dynamic. It's a very simple game. It's one of the simplest games you could play. You win just by showing up. You get a prize just by showing up. Weight Watchers, something that I should definitely look into. Weight Watchers, it's a very simple system. You can eat whatever you want, but everything has a certain amount of points. If you don't spend all your points, you can accumulate them and then completely eat whatever you want. If you want that piece of cake, it's simple. Just don't spend as many points in lunch. Why has this gained in popularity so much now, especially amongst men? The Wii has completely changed the way we look at video games, the way the families look at video games. Because now my mother can pick up a controller and be playing a game in 2 minutes. The games have penetrated everything. Anyone know what this is? Man, if you do, that's really geeking out. It's called World of Warcraft. Anyone heard of it? Right? You have, I think something like 10 or 11 million players that pay $15 a month to play it every month. It's a massive multiplayer online game. Everyone gets on. This is the average age of the user. Notice how the high school student is not the biggest user base. 18 to 28 years old make up half of all the users. These statistics are true. I use World of Warcraft as an example, but they're true for almost all video games. The population that first grew up with video games is starting to get into their 20s and 30s into the workplace. The populations that are coming in under them, younger kids, they're even more ingrained into video games. But let's go even further. Let's go back to May 22nd, 2010. Google. Hey. Yes, Google. I love Google. Google, on their homepage, to celebrate the anniversary of Pac-Man, decided to make a playable Pac-Man game out of the Google logo, right? In 48 hours of having this up, the United States of America lost 4.8 million hours of productivity during work hours. That is the equivalent of 1% of China's gross domestic product yearly. Because Google decided they were going to put a game out of their logo. Gamification has become such an important force in education that this is, I now think, the third year that they're having the Gamification Summit, in which people come out and do presentations on gamification and how to gamify the classroom. Here are some very simple game dynamics that can be implemented in almost any classroom. Achievement. The idea that an individual is gaining a virtual or a real reward. They do it with my daughter in 2nd grade. They get the treasure box. If she does all her homework all week, at the end of the week, she gets to go get a treasure from the treasure box. Okay? My wife teaches 7th grade literature. She changed the way she does her class this year. Just a little change. She used to have these things called reading checks. In order to make sure the kids were reading, she would do a quiz, on the previous night's reading assignment once a week. She changed it. Now, instead of getting a grade for it, you get points. And those points are tracked on her website, right? And you can trade in those points for prizes. Things like a homework pass. You forgot your homework one day? You got a 0 on it? You want to get rid of it? Just save up 400 points from those quizzes, and all of a sudden, you can get rid of that 0. Hey, you got a C on that test, and you don't want your parents to see you got a C, you want a B? I'll give you 10 points in the test. It costs you 600 points. Buy it. She says that she's been teaching now, for 11 or 12 years. She says she has never seen a more well-behaved class in her entire life. She goes, the moment that I just bring up that sheet to say, okay, because the kids get behavioral points also. They get points for bringing their stuff to class. If they don't bring it to class, they lose those points for the week. She's like, I don't have kids forgetting things in class. I have kids turning in all their homework. I have kids doing all their reading. My grades have never been better. All because of these crappy little points that mean nothing. Absolutely nothing. Kind of just like being the mayor of that Dunkin' Donuts doesn't actually really mean anything. Communal discovery. This is the idea where the entire community is facing a problem and they work together to solve it. This goes back to the idea of discovery. You present the problem to the entire class and you allow them to jointly figure it out. Very simple game dynamic. Status, becoming the mayor of the Dunkin' Donuts. One of the things my wife has done as part of it is that she implemented a leaderboard. The class that has the most average points at the end of the semester gets a Dunkin' Donuts party. She goes, that has become competitive, cutthroat classes. She used to have a problem where classes used to tell, in the morning, used to tell the other classes that there was a quiz that day. Not anymore, because they know if I tell them they have a quiz, they're going to get more points than we are. And we're no longer going to be in the lead. And now kids are pushing other kids to make sure they study for the test. Why? Because now your behavior affects my status, affects my ability to get a 50-cent donut at the end of the year. It's a very interesting dynamic. I'm almost done, and I want to just say a couple more things. Lee Sheldon from Indiana University did something very interesting. He got rid of grades in the traditional way. And this is actually where my wife got the idea from, is from this part of the presentation that one day she saw and she thought of it. He got rid of grades. He said, you no longer get grades for everything you do in my class, you get points. And the way you do it is you start off at level 1 with 0 points and you level up. The more points you get, the higher your grade. And so you never really lose points, you just gain them. Okay? And now, when you present the same thing you're presenting to students, just in reverse. Now, instead of starting up here and dropping, we're going to start you here and you have to earn it. He found that there was a huge change in the willingness of those students to actually go out there and want to study and want to do well, because they want that status. Whatever that status is, they want that status. This is what he said. As the gamer generation moves into the mainstream workforce, they are willing and eager to apply culture and learning techniques they bring with them from games. Right? It will be up to management, often pre-gamer generations, to figure out how to educate themselves to gamer culture and how to speak to it most effectively. You know, one of the things that I look at is this. You know, this is the Florida Interactive Entertainment Academy here. They have a school with the University of Central Florida, and they actually have a game design school. They have a school, a master's program for video game designers. And one of the things that I thought was cool is I took a tour of this school a few years ago, and one of the things I thought was the most amazing is that all the students participate in group assignments to create a final project, a final game. And then what they do is that they release that game on their website for anyone to download for free. And it's something that I'm going to be talking about tomorrow when I talk about project-based curriculums and community-based curriculums. If your welding student, instead of just welding two plates together, is asked to weld a bench that is going to be placed in a park, every time that student passes that park, what is he going to say? I built that bench. I did that in class. I now have a tangible reward for what I did. A tangible reward that others can see, that others can experience. I've made my environment a better place, a more entertaining place, a different place. My daughter and my wife, okay? My daughter is required twice a week to do an e-learning program, okay? It's called, she's required to do something called Ticket to Read, and there's another one, I forgot what it's called off the top of my head now, but, and this is the last thing I'm gonna talk about. She's required to go in there and they read a story online, you read a story online, then you do a bunch of games based on the story, like a vocabulary game, a grammar game, and then you answer questions about the game, right? And depending on how well you do on those tests, you get points. And as you get points, you get levels. And she started doing this because all the kids in the advanced program have to do this twice a week. First grade, she hated it the first time she did it. I don't want to do this. It's homework and anything. And I sat with her and I made her do it the first time. And then she got points and she's like, what are these points? And I said, oh, Mama, when you get enough points, you go from level 1 to level 2. What do you mean I go to level 2? Yeah, you go to level 2 and you move from a yellow color to the red color. That means you grow, you're better now. You're at a higher level. Well, what level are the other people in my class? I don't know. Why don't you ask them? She did it a couple more times. And then all of a sudden, one day I'm working in my office and I hear, oh my God! Oh my God! I got to level 2! And I've never had to ask her to do it again. She now does it 3 or 4 times a week because she wants to. She's constantly wanting to get to that next level. And the great thing about it is that it never runs out of levels. You know?
There is no end.
There's no end to it. So in the end, it's applying 2 very simple game dynamics here. The idea of status. The idea that somehow this status, just like my Rolex, just like my fancy suit, just like my Mustang that I drive, gives me status. This gives me status in my class. The teacher, in a very intelligent move in my opinion, has this level posted on the board for everyone. And now has made it, without saying anything, she made it into a competition. And finally, progress. The idea that she can track her progress on a daily basis. Okay? Later on today, when I talk about e-learning, I'm going to talk about Khan Academy and how Khan has adapted this idea of game mechanics into his learning techniques and how it could also be implemented in other things. But also, I want to encourage everyone to stick around for the rest of the program. It's very interesting. Thank you very much for sitting through this. I know that we went a little tiny bit over time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the program. Thank you.